Welcome to Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean and special returning guest Greg. And if you remember Greg is the guy who has the first gen Tacoma with a misfire problem with his number one cylinder. We've been trying to figure this thing out. We've been doing some diagnostics. We've been throwing some parts at it, which I know some people think that's probably not the smartest thing to do, but yes, we have thrown some parts at it and we haven't figured it out yet. Today, what we're gonna do is we're gonna do a leak down test of the number one cylinder. Even though we got a good compression number for the number one cylinder, we still want to double check that there's no problem with loss of compression in the number one cylinder, and the way you do that is with a leak down test. So in order to do this job, you need a leak down tester, and then you need an air compressor to give pressure to the leak down tester, because you have to pressurize the cylinder to do this test. So when doing a leak down test, you're looking at the percentage of loss. So first of all, you get that cylinder at top dead center compression. So that means that the piston is up at the topmost part of its stroke and the intake valves and exhaust valves are closed. You pressurize the cylinder using your air compressor and leak down tester, and then you see how much pressure loss it has. If I had 100 psi going into the cylinder and I noticed that it shows a 10% loss, then that would mean that it went down to 90 psi. If a cylinder is in good shape, it has no more than a 5 to 10% loss of pressure. No cylinder is going to be totally airtight, so there's going to be some type of pressure loss. If you get in between 10 to 20%, that's sort of pointing that you might have some type of issue. Anything above 20, you probably have some type of issue. You're losing the compression somewhere. Areas of where you can lose compression, number one, it could be getting past worn piston rings. The piston rings are worn, or the cylinder wall is worn in such a way that the rings aren't making a good seal with the cylinder wall anymore, and pressure is able to push past the rings. Number two is you could have a valve seat problem. It could be getting past a bad valve seat for the intake or exhaust valves, or you could have a burned valve. It's getting past one of those, either the intake or the exhaust valve. So that's number two and number three possibilities. Number four, you can have a bad head gasket. The head gasket has broken down, and now the pressure is able to get past the bad head gasket and get into the cooling channels, and that's where you're losing the pressure. A fifth possibility is you have a cracked head, and with the cracked head, also the pressure is able to escape into the cooling channels, and so that's a fifth way. So there's five main ways that you could be losing compression in your cylinder. So now let me show you the compression tester I bought from the company OTC, and then I'll show you the little air compressor I bought from Sears. It's a little Craftsman one. So here's the compression tester I bought from OTC. It's model number 5609. When you open it up, it has a nice set of instructions built right into the lid here. Here's the actual gauge set right here, and it has a hose down below that you use to screw into the cylinder. It has various adapters to screw into different thread sizes into the heads for the spark plug threads. Here's my little air compressor. It's not really meant to power air tools. It's just large enough for me to use for this purpose and for other things like filling tires and that sort of thing. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna get some stuff off the engine to where we can get the number one cylinder spark plug out so we can do the leak down test. And the number one cylinder is the forwardmost cylinder on the passenger side. We're gonna have to get this air tube out of the way. Once we get the air tube out of the way, then we can take the coil pack out and get the spark plug out. In order to get this air tube off, I'm gonna loosen this clamp at the throttle body, this clamp right here, loosen this clamp right here and slip this hose off, unclip this hose from here. I'm gonna loosen this clamp so I can disconnect the air tube from the air box, and then we have this wiring harness that's clipped into a couple rubber clips on the side of the air tube, and we have to get this free also. And then we should be able to get this whole air tube off the engine so we can get at the coil pack. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get this wiring harness unclipped from these rubber keepers. If you get your flat blade screwdriver in between the harness and the air tube, slip it into the rubber grommet and then twist, you could be able to get it out. Do the same with this one. There we go. And so we just set that off the side. You can see right here, these are the little things that will hang you up. So if you make a little clearance on the back side, then you could slip them out. Next, I'm going to start working on some of these clamps. So I have a little 1/4 inch ratchet, short extension, 10mm socket. You could also just use a Phillips head screwdriver, but I'm going to use the socket. I'm just going to loosen this up. And then I'm going to go up here and loosen these. Okay, those are all nice and loose. I'm going to loosen this little constant tension clamp, slide it back, just twist this off. I'm going to unclip this hose, and then now I should be able to just work this thing off. Work this connection off first. Work the air tube off of the throttle body. And then now I'm going to work it off of the air tube. And there we go, it's out of our way. And now you can see that we're able to expose all the coil packs, and we're gonna pull this coil pack out. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna disconnect the electrical connector to the coil pack. It's got a push tab right here. I'm gonna push it in and then pull back. So that's free. I'm gonna see if I can pull this coil pack out without disconnecting the spark plug wire that goes towards the driver's side. So I'm just gonna use the same ratchet I used to loosen the clamps. Now I'm gonna back this off. So I'm gonna just disconnect this spark plug wire from this little clip and see if I can pull it up and off and just keep it all connected, which I can. Now I'm gonna get a long extension with my 5/8 magnetic spark plug socket, and then I'm going to pull this spark plug. There's generally two types of spark plug sockets. One has a rubber grommet that basically grabs the top of the spark plug so it won't fall out. The type I have is the magnetic one, and these magnetic ones are leaps and bounds better than the one that uses a rubber grommet, because sometimes that rubber grommet will degrade. Sometimes it could actually pull off and get stuck onto the spark plug. So these magnetic ones are really nice to have, and I'll put a link in the video description of this one. And then there's also another set that has extensions already attached, and it's a swivel connection, and it's a nice little kit that I actually just bought one for myself because I saw that my buddy Jordan had one like it and I wanted to own one too. So I'll put links to both of those. So you just slide it down into the cylinder, fill the socket, engage the spark plug, and then I'm just using my 3/8 gear wrench flex head ratchet to remove it. And we have our spark plug out. So now we're ready to show you the procedure of how you can figure out the cylinder you want to do a leak down test on is at the top of its compression stroke. To do a leak down test, you need the cylinder all the way up to the top of its travel, and you need both of the intake valves and both of the exhaust valves closed. On the top of your compression stroke, when it's compressing the air fuel mixture, getting ready for the spark plug to fire the mixture and drive the piston downward, that's what it means to be at top dead center compression. The way you do that is you get the spark plug out like we showed you, and then you get some type of long tool that you can fit into the cylinder head. What I'm using is this long 1/4 inch drive extension. You slide this into your cylinder head through the spark plug hole, and then you could feel it resting up against the top of the piston. And then get onto the crank pulley with either a 1/2 inch drive or 3/8 drive ratchet with a 19mm socket. And you turn the engine clockwise because that's the direction it turns. So you want to turn it clockwise. You're watching your extension and you're noticing when it gets to the top of its travel, and you're just kind of paying attention. You might want to just take something you could erase easily, like a pencil or something you can clear off, maybe a little painter's pen, and then if you make a mark that you have to erase, you could just take some paint thinner and wash it off. we already figured out where the top of the travel is, and we marked it with a red permanent marker. So I'm going to start turning the crankshaft pulley bolt, and you're going to see this extension start to travel. So now it's going down. It's getting down to bottom dead center, and then it's going to start traveling upward. And what Greg and I did is we used both of our sets of eyes to double check to make sure that, okay, that is at the topmost travel. So as it got towards the top and we had a little bit of a landmark, whether it's a mark or on this actual extension, we could tell where it ended up with the knurls on this extension. We did it a bunch of times and we determined, okay, that's the top of the travel. And then we finally made a little red mark, and then we double checked. The red mark is right at the top of the cylinder head, and then now you're going to see it start traveling downward again. So that's how you figure out where the top of the stroke is for the piston. We'll do it one more time to show you. So there it is. So you can see that our red mark is lined up with the top of the cylinder head, and that's our visual indicator that we have the piston at the top of its travel. Once you figure that out, now you got to figure out when the piston is at the top of its travel, it's either one or two things. It's at top dead center compression, or it's at top dead center for the exhaust stroke. The way you figure that out is a few different methods. The method I'm going to use is I'm going to stick the compressor tester hose into the cylinder, screw it in, and I'm going to listen with my ear. And when I hear positive pressure coming out, that means that I'm on the compression stroke. You're also going to hear some air movement when you're on the power stroke, but that's going to be negative pressure. So you can differentiate between the two by putting your thumb over the top of the end of the hose. If you feel that it's sucking against your glove, you know you're on the power stroke. If you feel that it's kind of pushing air out, that means you know you're on the compression stroke. Let me show you the air nozzle that comes with the kit that I'm going to use. So here's the air nozzle. This one that actually comes on the hose itself is the right size threads. The kit, like I said, does come with adapters, so if you had a different size spark plug thread, you could hook up one of those adapters. And it has an O-ring. It doesn't say anything in the instructions of putting any oil on it, but what I'm going to do, just to make sure I get a nice airtight seal, is I'm just going to put just a little bit of oil on this O-ring. So I just got this little oil can, and I'm just going to squirt a little bit of oil on there. And now all I have to do is stick this down into the spark plug tube and screw this thing in. So you just have to feel for the threads engage, and then just twist the tube and it will screw in for you. When you feel it bottom out, just grab a hold of it and give it a twist. It doesn't have to be super tight because that O-ring is helping make the seal at the top of the cylinder head. So once it's snug, you're good to go. I'm gonna put this thing to my ear, and I'm going to start turning the crankshaft pulley bolt clockwise. I just heard some air pressure come out. Now I'm going to put my finger over the top and try to figure out, is this sucking my finger in or is it pushing pressure out? So I could feel it sucking against my finger, so I know I'm on the power stroke. I'm just going to keep going. So now I heard the air noise stop. Now it's past the power stroke. I'm hearing the air noise again, and now I'm just going to double check. Yeah, it's positive pressure now. I now know that I'm on the beginning of the compression stroke. The reason why I'm able to hear the air pressure coming out of this tube is because the intake valves are closed and the exhaust valves are closed. So that air pressure has to go somewhere, and it's going out this tube into my ear so I can hear it. So now I'm going to disconnect this. And now we're going to go back to our extension that we put the mark on to now figure out when we're at the very top of the stroke. So place that down in there. And now I'm just going to be watching my extension and looking for that red mark to show up. And it's showing up right now. And it looks like we are there. We now know that we have the number one cylinder at top dead center on the compression stroke. So here's the instructions underneath the lid on my OTC leak down tester, and it gives some instructions saying that air sources, which basically means the air compressor, needs to be 10 psi greater than the regulated input pressure on the left-hand gauge. What I plan to do is I'm gonna dial my regulator on my little Craftsman air compressor to 100 psi, and then I'm gonna set the pressure on the left-hand gauge of my OTC leak down tester to 90 psi. So here's the regulator for my air compressor, and I have this red knob, and so right now it's at about 120 psi. I'm gonna dial it down to 100. So you just rotate it counterclockwise, and I'm gonna get it right to 100. And here's my OTC leak down tester. So I have to hook up the air supply to this side. So you pull back the collar and you push it on. Oh, there we go. So now I need to put this pressure at 90. It has a twist knob, but in order to be able to twist it, you have to pull it out. A lot of them are like this. So you can see that it snaps in and pulls out. You snap it out so you can turn the knob, and then you start increasing the pressure. So you see the needle start to rise, and I'm gonna bring this to 90. I lost some air pressure from filling up this tool, so I'm gonna increase my pressure on the regulator back up to 100. And then now I should be able to get to that 90. Okay, we're finally at 90. And then now what we have to do is we have to connect up our air tube that I was using to listen for the air pressure to the right side. So we're gonna get our air nozzle back screwed into the cylinder. We just get it hand tight. We have to hook this up to our leak down tester. Now here's a word of caution. Don't forget to take off the ratchet that you have on the crank pulley bolt, because sometimes when you hook the pressure up and you don't have the cylinder perfect, it's gonna cause the engine to turn over, and then that wrench can go flying. You don't want your hands anywhere near the fan or any fan belts, and you don't want your ratchet still connected to the crank pulley bolt. So I'm gonna take it out. I got my ratchet free, and then I'm gonna hook up this air hose to my leak down tester. And then we're gonna hope that the engine doesn't turn over. If it turns over, we have to start over. We have to slide back the collar and push it in and hook it up. We have pressure coming in at 90 psi. We're looking at the right gauge, and it looks like it's right about at 84 psi. So that tells us we are losing about 6 psi. So we're at about a 6% loss, somewhere in that area. So we did a little math, and it ends up, it's a 7% loss. That tells us that his cylinder is fine. It's not the cause of his misfire. There doesn't seem to be anything mechanically wrong with this truck. It runs fine, it has good power, but we're still trying to figure out what the source of this misfire code popping up is, so we can fix it and then he can get his truck registered, because right now he can't get it registered because of this issue. So we're back to the drawing board. Let's say you have a very significant loss of pressure and you want to be able to figure out where that pressure is going. You can listen in certain spots to figure out where that pressure is going. If it's going past the piston rings, you can take your oil filler cap off and listen there. You can take your engine dipstick tube out and listen at the dipstick tube, maybe utilizing that leak down tester as just a way to get it right up there to listen for any air coming out. So those are two areas where you could listen to see if air pressure is getting past the piston rings. If it's getting past an intake valve, I can listen at the throttle body right here. If I hear air pressure coming out of the throttle body, then that means I have air pressure getting past the intake valve. I can open up the baffle so it makes it less airtight, and I could stick my head here and listen for air coming out. So that's how you could determine if the air is getting past the valve intake valve seat or maybe a burnt valve. If you want to determine if it's getting past a bad exhaust valve seat or a bad exhaust valve, you can listen to the exhaust and see if you hear air escaping through the tailpipe. That is a little bit of a long travel for that air pressure to get down there. So another possibility is you get underneath the rig, you take the upstream air fuel sensor or O2 sensor out before the catalytic converter, and then maybe use a listening device like that air tube from the test kit and see if you could hear air pressure coming out through the exhaust. Another thing you could do if you want to determine if it's a bad head gasket or maybe a cracked head, you can take off the radiator cap. You look into the top of the radiator, and if you see bubbles coming up, that means that the air pressure has gotten into the cooling channels and it's causing air pressure to go into the cooling system. And so if you see air bubbles there, that means you have an either head gasket leak or you have a cracked head. All right, so we're all done with this job. For Greg, it didn't produce any answers. His cylinder looks like it's fine. For you, as the viewing audience, you now learned how you can perform a leak down test on one of your cylinders. In the logical progression of things, you probably did a compression test, and then you found one of your cylinders was really low. It had a bad compression number compared to the other ones. The next step is you want to figure out where is that pressure going. So you get yourself a leak down tester like this one from OTC, and I'll put a link in the video description for this one so you can buy this one too if you decide you want to buy this one. You use the procedure that we showed you to figure out that you're at top dead center on the compression stroke for that cylinder. You put in your hose, you hook up air pressure to the tester, and then you hook up the nozzle into the right side of the tester, and then you figure out how much pressure you're losing in that cylinder. If you found that you're losing a significant amount of pressure, then you want to figure out where that pressure is going. Like I said, you can take off the oil filler cap, or you could pull the oil dipstick and you can listen at those two spots to determine if air pressure is getting past worn piston rings or past worn cylinder walls. If there's no air pressure leaking there, then you could check at the throttle body and listen for air pressure to see maybe you have a bad valve seat or bad intake valve. And then you can check at the exhaust pipe, or you can pull out one of your O2 sensors and listen there to see if you have a bad valve seat for the exhaust valve or a bad exhaust valve. Finally, you can take your radiator cap off and you can see if bubbles are coming up, letting you know you have a blown head gasket or you have a cracked head. With all that said, we thank you for watching Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean and Special Returning Guest Greg. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you have any questions or comments, do that below. Take care. Bye-bye. Sick mods and sick leak down tests.